Hello and welcome to the Omnex webinar, Why Maturity Levels Are Key to Your ISMS, TISAX label, and CMMC controls. Today's presenters are Mark Attai and Martin Hetwer. Martin Hetwer is the Managing Director for Omnex Europe. He's also the Director of Integrated Management Systems, a Senior Consultant, and a Certified Corporate Trainer for Omnex. He is a PMI certified project management professional and maintains over 25 professional certifications, including Certified Manager of Quality and Organizational Excellence, Certified Lead Auditor, TISAX Assessor, and Intax A-Spice Assessor, as well as Product Safety and Conformity Representative for BDA. Mark Attai is also presenting today, and he is a cybersecurity consultant and instructor with Omnex, who has over 30 years of experience in data privacy, information security, and cybersecurity. He has advised several government agencies and private corporations in the U.S. and internationally on complex data protection strategies and information security and cybersecurity challenges. During this webinar, if you have any questions for the presenters, please enter them in the Q&A box, and they will get to them to the best of their ability at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and someone from Omnex will reach out to you with how to access the recording and the slides after the webinar. All right, Mark. And Marty, you can take it away.
Thank you, Miles. Just want to make sure that everybody sees my screen fine. Marty? Are you there, Marty?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you. All right,
let's go. So folks, we got a lot of material to cover here in the next hour, so I'm going to do my best to cover it as quickly as possible. Again, as Miles had said, and thank you and welcome for joining us today. If you have any questions, put them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and get back to you with that information. Mark, can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So what we want to talk about today, or at least what I'm going to talk about today, is the Trusted Information Security Assessment Exchange and what that means. Next slide, please, Mark. So TISAX is a tool. It's really it's an assessment tool that helps the organization understand their threats and vulnerabilities in results in apportion to their assets. Right. Really, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that our assets are protected from loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And yes, that's correct. It's pronounced TISAX. TISAX. Next, please. So TISAX is in a collaboration with an organization called the ENX. ENX and VDA work closely together. Obviously, the VDA is the German Automobile Association or Automobile Manufacturers Association, and they work together to come up with this methodology, this assessment workbook that helps organizations obtain a label. Which is their let's call it a certification to prove to itself and to its partners that they are able to successfully share and protect information amongst the other parties, right? So if you have personally protected information, or if you've got drawings or designs that you share with others, we want to make sure that that your methods of protecting that information and securing that information and locking it down, not only while you have it in your hands, but while you're sharing it among your partners is protected. Next slide, please. So why do we need it? Well, we want to protect our organizational assets, right? Those assets that we need to conduct business. If any of those assets were to be corrupted or lost or something like that, and we couldn't do business, of course, that would be an impact on ourselves and potentially an impact on our customers, right? And our customers have the obligation and the willingness to understand whether or not we can protect their customer or any combined intellectual property, right? So we might not be design responsible, but the customer may share their designs with with us, and as a result, we might review those designs and provide alternatives or information back. So we want to make sure that that information is protected. Next, please. Well, why is it important? Well, it's important to the OEMs because, as I said, we share information, we share assets, we share tools, we share designs, right? And so they want to know that that information is protected. We also know that that in many cases, and TISAX is not necessarily just for automotive companies, although the automotive, the world is the ones that's really pushing it now. Anybody can become TISAX certified if they wish to. It doesn't matter what industry that they're in, but predominantly it's for automotive companies. And because we're talking about automotive companies, we're talking about a quality management system to IATF 16949. And IATF 16949 has a clause in there for contingency plans. And contingency plans also talk about the information security management system. As a matter of fact, here at the bottom, you can see additional details regarding information technology security techniques available through ISO 27001. And so we know that last year, ISO 27001 went through revision. They changed their controls, as well as a few other things within that revision. And it is those controls, it is the controls that are in ISO 27001 that have been adopted. They've been adopted into the information security assessment workbook from the VDA and ENX. And I'll show you where that happens. I can show you that those controls are one and the same, or that they overlap. And it's not 100% overlap, but they do overlap. And so the question then becomes, is it mandatory? Well, yeah, some OEMs, especially the German OEMs, have said that if you don't get your prescribed TISAX label, you're not going to be able to do business with them. You're not going to be able to bid on new business. So it's a carrot and a stick. It means that you can willingly take the opportunity to improve your information security management system, or you cannot do business with your customers, your current customers or future customers. So it's mandatory in that sense. Next slide, please, Mark. So in 2017, the VDA defined a uniform methodology, and they called that the information security for determining an information security level. And that's, of course, rolled into the TISAX or TISAX exchange. There's a catalog, an information security catalog that contains control questions. It's those control questions that determine the level of information security. And so today's discussion is about maturity levels. So we'll get there in just a moment. Next slide, please. So if you open up the latest information security assessment, if you download that from the ENX website, and we'll show you how to do that in just a moment, you're going to be able to do a self-assessment. And it's this self-assessment that needs to be done within the organization before you can book an appointment to have an external party come in to do an assessment. Now, Omnex can help you with that. If you haven't done a self-assessment or not completed one before, you can call up Omnex. You can call myself or one of my other, or Mark or one of the other consultants, and we can help you with that. We can do a gap assessment and a formal assessment of your information security management system. Next, please. Next slide, please, Mark. Did we lose Mark? Uh-oh, something's broken. We lost Mark. All right, so let me talk a little bit, and then we can go back through while Mark is trying to reconnect to the system here. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about what we're presenting here. So the first part of the step is to download, to go to the ENX website and go to a section called Downloads. And from there, you can download a copy of the latest assessment. Now, the most interesting part to this is that the assessment just changed. As a matter of fact, within the last couple of weeks, they posted a version 6. Now, that version 6 won't become available. It won't become available until April of next year. You can download it. You can start with the assessment. You can start doing that in advance. but any certifications to that latest assessment is not going to happen until March, April of next year, but it is available for you to do so. Let me see if I can share my slides here, just to see while we're waiting for Mark to come back, and see if I can't do that here, because I do have same or similar slides. Sorry, folks. Hopefully you can see my presentation at this point here. And so, as I said a moment ago, the 2022 version of the Information Security Assessment came out. Not only did it come out in November of 2022, but it also came out with a new title. And that new title includes cybersecurity and privacy protection for information security management system requirements. Now, here's the interesting thing: because it is a management system, it follows the same high-level structure as the other management systems. So, for instance, if you have a health and safety system to 45,001, or an environmental system to 14,000, or a quality management system to 9,001, all of those are management systems. And if you look at the clauses 4 through 10, they will be the same. They will be the same clauses, essentially, as ISO 27001, because it too is a management system. It too is a management system. And the good part about that is we can integrate them. We can integrate those management systems. So here we see a slide from the ENX Association. So if you go to ENX and you look it up there, you can go over to the participant handbook, which you can download. That's a really interesting document. Or you can come to Omnex. We can do some TISAX training with you, or ISO 27001 training. Or you can go to the downloads, and you can download a copy of the latest assessment. And so this is the one, the upcoming version that's out now on the site, which is 6.0.1. And so it says here in 2024, April 1st is when this is supposed to go live. But that shouldn't mean that you can't download it now and get a good start. Inside that workbook, there are 3 tabs. And so we call this dotted line the scope. And those 3 tabs are one for information security, one for data protection, and one for prototype protection. And so now you're going to have to decide. You're going to have to decide from your own organizations which of these apply to you. Maybe you don't do any prototypes. Maybe you don't have any personal data that needs to be protected. But you'll go through what we call a scope of analysis, or an SOA, and determine what that is. All right, so the point of today's assessment is talking about maturity levels. And so in this case, we have maturity levels from incomplete to optimizing, from 0 to 5. The target maturity level is 3. And that says we have an established system. Now, I'll show you in a moment what that means. And so going through it from the handbook, it says 0, incomplete. A process is not available, not followed, or not suitable for achieving the objectives. So for each of those different controls, or each of those different objectives, where are we at? 1 is that it's performed. It is an undocumented or incompletely documented process is followed. Indicators exist that it achieves, and indicators exist that it achieves its objectives. So there's something there that shows that it's actually working. Managed is a process. The process is achieving its objectives, and it's being followed. So it has to be documented, and people have to know what it is, and they have to follow that process. Process documentation and process implementation evidence are available. So we should be able to look for objective evidence during our assessment or our audit to show that this thing is actually there, and that it's actually documented. Now, 3 is I guess what we would call the default, or the minimum level that we want to see, and that's called established. It's a standard process integrated into the system. It's not sitting out on its own somewhere. It's actually integrated into the overall system. Linkages and dependencies with other processes are documented. With interfaces are created. Evidence exists that the process has been suitably and actively and actively over an extended period of time. Sometimes the German doesn't translate so nice into English here. So what they're just trying to say is that there is evidence that not only is the process implemented, but you've got some type of results indicators, and that over a period of time, you're achieving those results or those intended outcomes. And so really, to get to a level 3, you need to have some key performance results. You need to be able to show, the process owners for those processes need to show that it's actually working. Number 4 is predictable. So we do have an established process, and it is being followed. The effectiveness of the process is continually monitored and improved. And of course, number 5 is optimizing. A predictable process with continual improvement is a major objective, is followed. Improvement is actively advanced by dedicated resources. I would say that's by process owners. So there's basically a description, or a short description, of the 5 levels that we might have. And I said level 3 established is the default. Obviously, if it was my company, if I was the boss, I would want to see a level 4 or even a level 5 for my processes. Why would I put a system in place if it's not optimized, if it's full of waste and full of error, right? I wouldn't want that. My goal would be to have an optimized system, but that's just me talking. So what's the difference between an ML2 and versus an ML3? So established, as I said, is the optimum thing. And so process deployment at the bottom, it says a defined process based on appropriate, selected, and or tailored standard process is deployed. Required roles, responsibilities, and authorities for implementing the defined processes are assigned and communicated. What does that sound like, folks? That sounds exactly what IATF says about process owners. In clause 5 of IATF, it says we need to have process owners. Well, the same thing applies here for information security. And this is even in the TISAX workbook. This is where it's being pulled from. It said we need to have process owners, somebody to manage these implemented processes. So I'm not going to read all the fine points here on the slide. You can get a copy and look at that. So, we've got the principle and you've got the definitions down below. All right, maturity levels. The information security assessment uses a concept of maturity levels to rate the quality of all aspects of your information security management system. Isn't that interesting? TISAX, the TISAX Information Security Assessment, uses maturity levels for your information security management system. So, over the past few years, I've had a lot of people say to me, Marty, we want to implement TISAX. And I say, well, where are you with your information security management system? Say, well, we don't have one. I said, well, are you going to implement one? No, we want TISAX. Well, folks, unfortunately, without an information security management system, or at least the framework with the controls for an information security management system, you will not be successful. You will not be successful in achieving an assessment label. Now, again, the label and the level are two different things. The level, we're talking about the maturity levels of the processes. The label is the overall assessment that you're going to get, that you're going to share over the ENX database to show what label your organization is. And so that label will include all of those things that you need to do to satisfy your customers' expectations. So here's an example of requirements and questions, and this is from the older standard, or the current standard that's still available until April of next year. We have the question number, so 141 or 151, and then we have, in this case, two categories, one for risk management and one for assessments. And so the question is very simple. To what extent are information security risks managed? Now, of course, that would suggest to us that we have some type of information risk management system in place. And we know that ISO 31000 is the standard for risk management. So what does the organization, what have you put in place for risk management policies and processes, right? Do you have a risk register? Do you have a risk treatment plan? And so then it goes on to talk about information security risk management aims at the timely detection, assessment, and addressing risks in order to achieve the protection goals being confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And then it has some must and should requirements. So that third or the fourth column here, risk assessments are carried out both at regular intervals and in response to incidents. Information security risks are appropriately assessed. These are must requirements. You have to do that. If you don't answer the must requirements, or you don't cover the must requirements, you're not going to be able to mark yourself a 2 or a 3. You might not even get to a level 1 if you don't do the must requirements. And then, of course, the last one is the last column here on the far right is the should requirements. So what are the other requirements that the organization should do to make sure that we've got a decent information security management system, and that we cover both the Annex A controls out of ISO 27001 and the TISAX controls? One second here, I'll just check my time, and I think we're good. So the control questions that we have, which is the basis for the statement of applicability, we have those questions that must be met, and then we have those questions that should be met on the left-hand side here. There is an objective for each control question. What is the intent of the question? What is the focus area for that question? And there can also be some additional requirements, those requirements that have very high protection needs, and they apply only, very high protection needs apply only to personally protected information, right? So where you have PII or PPI, that's where you have to make sure that you have your very high protection needs. If you have prototypes or you do work with special materials with customers, you probably only need high protection needs, right? So that's a kind of a breakdown of what each question looks like in the direction. The most important thing, and auditors know this, the most important thing is that we need to ask, did you meet the intent? What's the intent of the question? If the interviewee doesn't understand the intent, or the process owner doesn't understand the intent, then there's a very good chance that they didn't meet the base requirements. They didn't meet the base requirements. So what's the intent? So what are those organizational assets that require protection with controls? Well, intellectual property, financials, code, customer-owned tools, customer-owned data, personal data. We talked about personal protected information, product designs, proprietary process secrets, right? Those things that we don't want people to know, because that's how we manage our process, how we make our products. And of course, organizational knowledge. These are some examples of organizational assets that require protection with controls. So what are those controls? All right, well, what if the control fails? What if the control to protect those assets in terms of its confidentiality, integrity, or availability fails? How bad is it? Is it catastrophic? Is it disastrous? Is it tragedy? Is it painful? Or, well, is it low or just unlucky? Right? How bad is this? And so we need to, from our risk management standpoint, we need to have a ranking system to figure out what that is, right? Homeland Security has a risk ranking: severe, high, elevated, guarded, low. Actually, I think they've done away with this. I think Homeland Security has done away with this particular ranking system, but it's one that they used for many years, right? So whatever it is that your organization chooses to use for ranking the severity is very important. So ISO 27001 Annex A provides those controls. And a control is a measure, is something that we do that modifies the risk. And there are two types of controls. I'm not going to read this for you, but there are organizational controls and there are technical controls. And sometimes those controls are one and the same. If we break down Annex A controls, we see that there are essentially 4 sections, sections 5, 6, 7, and 8. Each one of those has a number of controls: 37 for organizational, 8 for people or human resources, 14 for physical, and 34 that are technological in nature, for a total of 93 controls. The TISAX workbook, or at least the old one, had a suitable number. It was about 2/3 the same number of controls. But what we need to figure out is, for each of those controls, who owns them? How many are owned by information technology and information security? How many of them are owned by operations or the development team? How many are owned by HR or by purchasing or legal? That's up to you. That's up to you to decide from your organization who owns what. Who are the process owners for these controls? And when we figure that out, first we're going to figure out when we do the statement of applicability, what applies, and then we're going to figure out who owns it. And then we're going to figure out what the risk is. Figure out what the risk is. And so here we see an information or a generic example of an information security management system. This big red block in the middle, well, those are all clauses in the standard related to risk. You can see that risk and risk management and risk treatment and risk analysis is a very hefty part of the entire information management system, especially when it comes to information security. And so we have some choices. We can reduce the risk, we can transfer the risk, we can accept the risk, we can avoid the risk. Now we know, many of us are automotive type people, or we have some things, and many of us use an FMEA. And when we look at the FMEA, risk is, according to ISO 31000, a combination of severity and occurrence. So normally we can't change the severity, but we can mitigate the risk by getting rid of the occurrence or limiting the occurrence of that potential failure or failure mode. How do we do that? Simple, with prevention. So many of these controls need to be preventive in nature. If we can prevent the failure from happening, the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability, then there's no risk. It cancels out half the equation. We need the severity times the occurrence. If there's no occurrence, because we've prevented it, there's no risk. So this management system, as are all management systems, are heavily vested in how we control the risks. So here, for example, are some organizational and technological controls: prevention, deterrence, detection, recovery, correction, monitoring, and awareness. And awareness includes competence. Competence is a combination of skills, experience, knowledge, and training, right? Competence is not just about training, right? It has other components to it as well. And so let's talk about some of these examples. So from a prevention standpoint, maybe we have a firewall. Maybe we have a firewall to prevent somebody from getting in from the outside. Maybe from a security area, we have a deterrence, right? We have some way to make sure that people are deterred from going into those areas. Maybe locks or fences, or a German Shepherd on the other side of the fence, something that would deter somebody from going into that area. We might have malware detection, right? Some way to detect that something is brewing in the background, or potentially brewing in the background. If we were to lose some confidentiality or availability, can we recover? What controls do we have for recovery? Right? What do we have for continually planning our processes? How do we monitor? And again, how do we handle the development of awareness and competence within our people? So again, these are just some examples of different things that we might put in place for applicable controls. Here, for example, something a little bit different. Here we see not an FMEA method, but a bow tie risk analysis method, right? And so we see here that the risk in the middle, our cybersecurity event risk, is that someone compromises a user email. Well, what's the threat to the information security management system? If we go over to the left side, we could have a firewall breach, or a person's email could be hacked. Well, before that happens, we're going to put some shields in here. We're going to put in some controls that are not going to allow that person's email to get hacked. We can put in as many as we want. Same thing for the firewall. We can put in as many controls that we have, and we might even test those protocols. Or we might do something to escalate this particular threat to the information security method. And maybe we add multi-factor authentication for email. On the other side of this bow tie, you can see it looks like a bow tie, are the consequences. If we don't have good prevention in place, what's going to happen? Well, we could have a loss of system control or data, or our emails could be faked. Well, what do we do in this case? What shields do we have in place? Well, we could have a network failover, or we could have some type of disaster recovery process. Maybe we have some password protocols, or maybe we do some additional user awareness on how to make sure that we don't have an escalation where our emails get faked by clicking on some other type of or click training, so we don't click on the wrong things. Now the question is, what's the risk if any of these barrier controls fail to work? Right? We know that some controls are technological and some controls are organizational. So really, from a risk standpoint, is what is the risk if our controls fail? How robust are those controls? How robust is that prevention that we put in place? Did we put any prevention in place? What's the risk if any of these were to fail? And so we've been kind of banging on this for a few minutes. We have the maturity levels, which we talked about from 0 to 5, but now we're going to talk about the assessment levels. And from the handbook here, we can see that the customer, in many cases, will specify what level they want. So are we handling information with high protection needs? Not very high, but high. So that's an assessment level 2. Are we handling information with very high protection needs? That's an assessment label, not level. Let's try label. Let's use the proper word, label, Martin. So that's a label 3. What about prototypes? If we have any prototypes, usually they'll ask for a label, an assessment label of 3. Data protection. If we have any GDPR data, that's a level 2. If we have any special categories of data, that's a 3. And so this is a negotiation between the organization and its clients. And top management has to decide what label they're going to pursue. Likely that label is going to be whatever the customer has asked for. But that doesn't mean that if they've asked for a level 2, that doesn't mean that leadership will say, no, we want to pursue a label 3 because sometime in the future we may do these things. We're not doing them now. And so TISAX, as I said, we've got all the way from incomplete to optimizing as a level. CMMC model structure, which Mark will talk about here in just a moment, has different ones, or at least the old CMM structure had different ones from level 1 to level 5 for processes and level 1 to level 5 for practices. Now we have a different set of requirements, and I'll let Mark speak to those here in just a moment. And so for automotive SPICE, another standard that's out there for basically ISO 9001 for the development and the certification of software, we see exactly the same thing. Interestingly, the people that gave us automotive SPICE are also involved with VDA. And so we see many of the same terms coming back: basic, perform, managed, established, predictable, and innovating. Right? We see that come back in SPICE, but it's essentially the same 5 levels. Same 5 levels of maturity. We want to do a gap assessment. We want to know the current state. We want to know the ideal future state, and then we need to come up with an action plan to get there. Some of the barriers that we have for controls, well, sometimes the team goes through with blinders on. As I said earlier, we hear this all the time. We want a TISAX label. We want a TISAX label, but we don't want to do information security management system. Not possible. Not possible. You need to have at least the framework for those controls. No ownership of stray processes. We stand there and we ask, well, who's responsible for this? Who owns this process? Nobody, right? We get deer in the headlights look, right? There's nobody that leadership has assigned to take care of owning these processes. We don't have the right competencies. We put people into place and they don't have the skills, the training, the education, the experience, or the certification needed to do the job properly. And so they lack the needed competencies and the awareness. The Japanese beat this into me. The worst type of requirement is no requirement. The worst type of requirement is no requirement. Without a requirement, I cannot fail. No requirement, no failure. And so what are those missing requirements? Or the team decides they're going to take some shortcuts, right? They don't have a roadmap yet. They don't know where they're headed, but they know that they want to take some shortcuts. More importantly, we have interested parties. We have interested parties that are internal to the organization and those that are external to the organization. If we forget an interested party or we don't take their expectations into account, that could turn into a big problem. They could have somebody that wants to disrupt or cancel the project if we don't take their expectations and requirements into account. My old boss used to say, no plan, bad plan, fail to follow the plan, or 3 paths to failure. What's the plan? And of course, did we decide we're going to treat these risks, but our risk treatments are ineffective? All right, and so that is my half. How did I do? I'm 4 minutes over. I'm sorry. A little bit of
No
a start at the start.
Yeah. Could you please continue? I have some tornado activities around my house here, so I have a backup system, but it takes a minute or so to get.
No, you go on. You just tell me when to advance the slides, Mark.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us today for talking about TISAX and CMMC. CMMC has been around from the first version, which is called CMMC 1.0, and now we are CMMC 2.0, and it's still not ready. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. I divided my presentation into 3 main parts. We'll talk about some basics of CMMC, the requirements, the controls, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about where they are now, where the DoD is in terms of requirements for subcontractors and contractors. And then I'll end the presentation with telling you a little bit about how Omnex can help you with CMMC. Please, Madi. Madi, please. I'm showing, okay, there. Okay, just basics about CMMC. It's basically designed by the Department of Defense, the DoD, to ensure that its contractors and subcontractors are protecting sensitive data that they share with the DoD and other partners. Please, Marty. Marty, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, we continue here. There are 3 main objectives for CMMC. The first one is to protect sensitive data. Second one is to basically have a unified standard. Standard is called a little loosely here. It's not a standard. It's more of a regulation or a framework based on NIST standards. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then at the end, have accountability for defense companies to make sure that they are responsible for protecting government data. Please, Marty.
Able to see, Mark? CMMC
yes.
structure?
Yeah. Perfect, yeah. I mentioned earlier that we have CMMC 1.0 on the left-hand side of the screen, which has 5 levels. Has been streamed down to 3 levels, which makes a lot more sense these days. In some ways, they are filled with CMMC 1.0, a lot of complaints from contractors and subcontractors. So they stream down the levels of requirement. So there are 3 levels now. And then we'll look into details about what those levels are on the next slide, please, Marty. Okay, yes, that's good, Marty, thanks. There are 3 main levels. Level 1 requires 17 controls. I'm finding out these days that a lot of companies are basically happy with level 1, even though you may not be accepted by DoD requirements, depending on what you are dealing with, what kind of information you are dealing with DoD. But level 1, we'll look at it in details in a few minutes, and level 2 also, level 3, what is required in terms of what you are doing with the DoD, what kind of requirements they are imposed on the information that you are dealing with. And so, but just remember from this slide that there are 3 main levels that are required for you to comply with, coming with different set of controls. Marty, please. Okay, at level 1, you are basically dealing with 17 controls, which they call practices. Has to do just with contract information, very basic security requirements. As I mentioned earlier, I see a lot of companies just staying at level 1 for now. And at the end, I will also suggest that you actually go to level 1 as a company. If you deal with DoD, you just want to go to level 1 to see where you are, an internal quick self-assessment, quick audit to see if you actually meet those 17 practices to begin with, before you even think about level 2. Madi? At level 2, it becomes a little complicated. As a matter of fact, level 2 has 2 sub-levels, right? The ones that deal with national security information and the ones that don't. And if you are dealing with the national security, then you are required to basically implement NIST SP 800-171 plus some other controls that the DoD requires. So basically, you have to comply with 17 basic controls and add 120 more controls to satisfy. I'm sorry, 110 more controls to satisfy level 2. Now, if you deal with national security, then you are required to bring in what we call the C3PAO, which is an external auditor to certify that you are basically meeting the requirements at level 2, which needs the controls for controls that deal with national security. So again, at level 2, there are 2 sub-levels. Level 1 that doesn't deal with national security, and level 2 that deals with national security. And depending on where you are, then you might want to call in an external auditor to certify that you are meeting the requirements of level 2. Martin, please. Now, at level 3, things become very robust in terms of requirements. Not only you have to satisfy the 110 controls from 800-171, you also have to add some controls from 800-172. So you'll be up to 130 some controls. At that point, basically, the DoD has to send in their own actors, their own assessors, their own auditors. And at this point, you are dealing with what we call advanced persistent threats, APTs. Those are threats that are constant until cybercrime people basically succeed. And if you are in that category, you basically are dealing with level 3 for DoD, and they bring in their own assessors and their own certified assessors. Marty, please.
Nope. There we go.
All right. There are 2 main concepts. You know, let's not complicate it. It's called FCI and CUI. And here I'm telling you what they are. CUI are basically, that's where you start talking about level 2 and level 3. And you are dealing at that level with what they call controlled unclassified information. And at that point, you are either level 2, sub-level 2-1 or sub-level 2, sub-level 2 for level 2. And for FCI, basically that is contract information, basic contract information at the 17 required controls that I talked to you about earlier. So you have to, first of all, you have to figure out what are your requirements, whether you are dealing with FCI or CUI. It is not difficult to really assess, and if you need some help, you know, Omnex can help, or other companies can help you figure out what you need in terms of the DoD requirements. Marty? So what's the difference between FCI and CUI? Very, very simple. If you cannot basically figure out whether you need FCI or CUI, just go under this assumption. If you are only dealing with contract information, actually I'll give you some examples of that in the couple of following slides. What constitutes an FCI, what constitutes a CUI? But it's very, I think it's very sensible to understand. If you are dealing with DoD, you will know pretty much quickly whether you need a CUI or an FCI kind of protection for your information. Maggie? So some example of CUI, the control on classified information. If you are dealing, Maggie mentioned earlier, PI, when he was talking about TISAX, when you are dealing with personally identifiable information, it becomes a big deal, PI, and then even going beyond PI, SPI, which is sensitive. The difference between those two is just that. When it is sensitive personal information that is, if it is disclosed or lost or mishandled, can cause severe and basically dangerous information breaches for personal, sensitive information. And then CUI can also be proprietary business information, can be sensitive but unclassified, can be for use, for official use only, for law enforcement use. So those are examples of CUI. Pretty much obvious. FCI, as I mentioned earlier, has to do with contract information, charts, and technical information that does have any sensitive or national security issues. Please, Marty. Okay, this is for really reference purposes. We're not going to spend any more time here. If you do have some questions about this asset category that I put together, please send me an email or send Maz an email and I'll send it to you. It's just a table that tells you a little bit about what asset categories requires, what kind of protection. Please, Marty. Okay, let's continue. Okay, one more. All right. This is kind of the second part that I mentioned to you earlier, which is where is the DoD with all the CMMC stuff? Because they keep changing the requirements, not the requirements per se, but they require a date for complying. Right now, the date is sometime in 2024, I believe May or June 2024, where they're going to put the hammer down and say that if you are not basically conforming to the requirements, whichever level you are, you're not going to be sending your contracts to the DoD. But then again, knowing the DoD and knowing many government programs, that can also change. But the point that I would like to make to you, though, if you deal with DoD, don't wait until that requirements comes in, because it's going to come in no matter what. We know that. Don't wait. I recommend at least to go and test your controls, at least at level 1, which is only 17 controls. Test that first to see how you do. It is just a self-assessment. You basically register if you are comply or you don't comply, and then see where you are. At that point, you are ready at least for level 1, and then move on to level 2 if that's a requirement for your activities. So don't wait because the government is basically getting their act together. They have a lot of partners, private partners also, so it's taking some time as usual, but do not wait for this hammer to come down before you start your activities for CMMC. Mandy, please. All right, this is my third part. How can Omnex help you? Because we do have processes and abilities and know-how for CMMC. Next, please, Marty. All right, on this slide, I basically tell you how is Omnex prepared to help you with CMMC. First of all, Omnex is an RPO. An RPO basically is a registered practitioner organization. It can do a lot of things, consulting, basically getting you all the way to the point of having an external assessment. And by the way, the second point there is RP, which is a registered practitioner. I myself, I am an RP. I can help you with consulting services all the way to the point where you need basically an external assessor. Next, please. All right, Omnex provide training, an FTP. It's a licensed training provider. We've been actually providing training for quite some time now. Marty, please. Again, this is just a repeat of what I just said. Omnex is an RPO, which is a registered practitioner organization, can provide training and services and consulting services. Next, please, Marty. All right, this is basically your road to become compliant. You start with a gap analysis. We can do that. Omnex can do that. You can do the implementation. Omnex can do that. You can verify where you are in terms of verifying that you are ready, whether it's level 1, level 2, or level 12. Omnex can help you do that. The final level, before an assessor comes in, that's where we have basically we can stop. Omnex has basic competence to get you all the way to where you can do a final assessment, and then you can bring in an external auditor to help you get certified. Marty, please. All right, I think I'm pretty much done with my presentation. If you have any questions, as Marty mentioned, as I mentioned, as Miles mentioned, you can basically put them into the chat, and we can either respond right away or get back to you, you know, in a little time. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be in touch. If you need any TISAX help or any Omnex help or any 27,001 help or any other help that I think Miles mentioned earlier at the presentation, we are here to help you. Thank you.
I'm just looking at the question box here. I don't see anything for the moment, but we'll stay on here for a few more minutes and give you a chance to think about what you heard. And if you have any questions or any concerns, you don't have to put them here today. You can always send it to us in an email too. So it's no pressure. But if there's something pressing that you'd like us to respond to, we'll hang on here for a few more minutes and see what we can do to answer.
Miles, are there any questions pending?
I'm looking right now. I don't see any, Mark. I don't see any in the box. So
okay.
Maybe I'll ask you a question, Mark. We're both panelists. I'll ask you a question. So,
sure.
So a little bit interesting there between the FARs and the DFARs. What's the difference between FARs and DFARs?
FARs stands for Federal Acquisition Requirement, and basically, again, let's not talk about standard. These are government regulations that basically controls when you are dealing with the deal. Actually, FARs has basically affect beyond the DoD, say any government agencies, basically making sure that whatever you're providing has gone through some cybersecurity verifications and controls. They want to make sure that when they deal with you, you are protecting any information that comes from the government office or agency. DFARS is basically, you know, an added version of FARS. FARS came first, I believe, in 2018, I believe. Then DFARS came in at, I think, either 19 or 2020. Just a kind of a beefed up FARS. Those are, again, federal regulations that make sure that whenever you're dealing with a government agency, you are protecting that information, that there's a way for you. These are basic evolutions of FARS, DFARS, you know, against CMMC 1, CMMC 2. By the way, don't be surprised if in a year or two, you hear of CMMC 3.0. I mean, that's just how government works. You know, if you deal with them, you just have to get used to that. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but all these, what we call controls or requirements or practices, in terms of CMMC, they come from NIST. NIST is basically National Institute of Technology. It is the reference for any government agency in terms of security and cybersecurity. They publish basically the requirements for government agencies. So I don't know if that answers your question, Marty.
No, very good. That's what I was looking for. I kind of want to know why it's different from one federal thing to well, I guess the question is if it's for defense, then obviously it's a different set of requirements.
Right. Yeah.
And I like this. Sorry, I apologize. I really like this term, advanced persistent threat. I think I'm going to get myself a t-shirt. I'm going to get myself a t-shirt, and then I'm going to go around and I'll be an advanced persistent threat.
Marty, thanks for bringing that up, because I mean, us in the cybersecurity field, this is what basically makes us sleepless at night. If we have a client that we know has an APT, you don't sleep, because it is persistent until they get what they want. And they do get it most of the time if you're not well prepared, especially if you're not well prepared. It is advanced, it is persistent until they get you. That's what it is, basically.
All right. Do you have any questions for me, Mark?
Not a question, but just to note that there is a new TISAX VDA controls that just came out, I think, just about 2 weeks ago. I'm just basically curious until we get our hands on the differences and the different controls and requirements, and just to kind of put that information out for TISAX. People who are interested in TISAX, that there's a new version that just came out about a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know if you started working on that, Marty. Have you?
Yeah, so October 15th, they came out. I've put together a workbook that actually shows the latest controls and how they line up between Annex A and between TISAX. So we have that now.
Okay.
Obviously, as I said, this thing's not going to come into effect until April 1st, 2024. But that doesn't mean that we can't start planning. That doesn't mean that somebody can't take it now and download it from the ENX website and start working on it. So yeah, like I said, the controls overlap. The Annex A controls in ISO 27001 overlap with the TISAX controls. Some still refer to the old standard, the old 2013 standard, and some refer to the latest 2022 standard of the Annex A controls. So again, to be successful with TISAX, one needs to have the framework for those controls that are referenced. You need to put that in place. Those are information security controls. And so those controls need to be built on at least the framework or the foundation of an information security management system. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful, right? The controls won't be robust, and the controls will fail. And as a result of that failure, the prevention being inadequate, we're going to end up with, as you just pointed out, a persistent advanced threat that has occurred, right? It's a threat that's been out there, a risk that's been obvious, but we haven't taken the official preventive actions. Okay.
Thank you, Marty.
Yeah, thank you. All right, folks, if there's no questions, I don't see any, we'll let you go then.
All righty. Thanks.
All right, folks, thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Kate. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.